Okay, let's jump right into this explainer. Today, we're going to explore how the hidden architecture of governance literally dictates economic and human prosperity at every single level. Now, we often see the end results of a thriving society, right? We see bustling businesses, healthy communities, innovative schools. But today, we're popping the hood. We are going to look directly at the structural systems that actually make all of that possible.
Now, what is really fascinating about this source material from the UN System Task Team is that it establishes the ultimate, absolute high stakes for our discussion. The UN makes it exceptionally clear: effective institutions are the key to eradicating poverty. This isn't just bureaucratic paperwork, it is the very foundation of human development. If we don't get this right, everything else falls apart. To truly grasp how this works, we're going to zoom all the way in from the global perspective down to local realities. We'll be covering defining good governance, the global development agenda, local governments and growth, the fragmentation debate, and finally, taxes, services, and growth.
Let's start right at the beginning with Part 1, Defining Good Governance. So, the absolutely crucial point here is establishing exactly what we mean when we talk about this somewhat abstract concept. I want you to think of governance not as a bunch of boring red tape bureaucracy, but as the underlying operating system of a society. It's the hidden framework that enables everything else to function. If your computer or phone's operating system is running smoothly, your apps work perfectly. In society, those apps are things like commercial business, public education, and health services. But if the OS is corrupt, slow, or fragmented, well, those societal apps are going to crash, no matter how great they might be on their own.
And there's a foundational distinction here that we actually get wrong a lot. We tend to use these two terms interchangeably, but they are very different. Government is just the formal institution. It's a territorially based body that has binding legal authority. Think City Hall. Governance, on the other hand, is the whole shebang. It's a much wider collaborative process. It encompasses the formal government, for sure, but it also involves nonprofits, civic networks, neighborhood associations, and business leaders, all working together to pursue collective action.
With those definitions locked in, let's move to Part 2, the Global Development Agenda, to see how these concepts are actually applied globally. On a global scale, the UN identifies very specific mechanisms as absolutely vital for creating an environment where inclusive human development can take root. We're talking about things like transparency and accountability, actively curbing corruption, broad stakeholder participation, and judicial independence. These are the bedrock principles. The post-2015 UN agenda recognizes a pretty hard truth. You simply cannot achieve sustainable development, empower marginalized groups, or even protect the environment without having these specific principles firmly in place.
And the reason this matters so deeply is best captured by the source itself. It states, quote, "Ineffective institutions usually result in the greatest harm to those who are poor and vulnerable," end quote. Failing to uphold these governance principles isn't just some administrative failure on a spreadsheet. It has devastating real-world consequences. A lack of governance directly translates to a lack of equity and safety for everyday people.
So, we understand what governance means for global human rights and macro-level development. But naturally, that brings us to a huge question. How does this abstract operating system impact a metropolitan city? How does it actually affect your daily commute or the local job market?
That brings us to our regional economic context in Part 3, local governments and growth. Let's see how these systems play out locally.
What's really fascinating here is the structural mismatch we see, particularly in the United States. The sources point out that while the real economy operates regionally, meaning labor markets, housing, and transportation networks span across massive metropolitan areas pretty seamlessly, our political systems are highly localized. In the US, there's virtually no general-purpose unit of government operating at the regional level. Basically, the economic map and the political map just don't match up.
Instead, what we end up with is a messy reality of fragmentation, and it comes in two distinct flavors. First, we have horizontal fragmentation. That's where a single economic region is broken down into dozens of multiple competing municipalities, towns, and counties. Second, we have vertical fragmentation. Think of this as a bureaucratic pancake stack, where residents are layered with overlapping entities. You've got a school district, a water authority, and a transit district all stacked directly on top of one another, and each one has its own budget and its own taxing power.
All right, this complex overlapping web leads us directly to Part 4, the fragmentation debate.
We are going to completely neutrally lay out both sides here, because this is literally one of the most fiercely debated topics in urban economics. On one side, you have the pro-fragmentation camp, Often drawing on Thibaut's theory, they argue that having lots of local governments creates incredibly healthy competition. The idea is that consumer voters can shop around. Businesses can choose the absolute perfect community fit. This competition is supposed to force local governments to be highly efficient and actively drive down costs. On the flip side, consolidationists argue that fragmentation is inherently harmful. They maintain that larger, unified governments achieve massive, much-needed economies of scale. Plus, they argue that consolidation provides far greater regional transparency and totally avoids the wasteful zero-sum game of corporate welfare, where neighboring towns just use tax breaks to poach businesses back and forth from each other without actually creating any genuine net new regional growth.
So, what does the actual data say? Well, it's incredibly mixed, which is exactly why this debate is still raging. Paitis and Hamilton found that horizontal fragmentation actively hurts regional income growth. But then, Stansel looked at the data and found the exact opposite. Having many local governments actually increases population and income growth. Why the massive contradiction? Well, Grasmuke and Shields discovered that the results completely flip depending on exactly how you measure fragmentation in the first place, like whether you just count the raw number of governments or if you weight them by their relative spending power. And as for that vertical fragmentation, the overlapping special districts we talked about, Barry's research shows they tend to act like a common pool problem, consistently driving up overall taxation and spending because single-purpose politicians just want to maximize their specific budgets.
Speaking of budgets and taxation, this brings us to a really crucial, often misunderstood question about how local governments compete for businesses. Do local taxes automatically deter economic growth? Is it always a bad thing? Let's break down the tangible financial levers of local governance in our final section. Part 5. Taxes, Services, and Growth.
The sources clarify a vital economic reality here. Yes, taxes are absolutely an operating cost for businesses, but they are not inherently bad for growth. Taxes really act as a deterrent only when the resulting services are inefficient or when business taxes are being used to heavily cross-subsidize services for voting households rather than benefiting the commercial sector. However, if those taxes are used to efficiently fund valuable local services, providing public goods that equal or exceed the cost of the actual tax, they are actually a massive promoter of growth. In fact, the research clearly shows that when businesses decide where to locate, they care way more about labor quality and transportation networks than they do about minor differences in the local tax rate.
So what are those high-value public goods? Well, for a region to truly thrive, its local governance must collaborate to provide massive region-wide services. We're talking about developing a top-tier, high-quality labor pool through robust local education. We're talking about expansive, well-maintained regional highway systems, major airports with national and international links, and highly reliable public safety and waste management. These are the massive, heavy-lifting engines that draw real businesses and talent to a region. And let's be real, no single, fragmented municipality can easily fund or manage them on its own. It requires true, cohesive regional governance.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final, provocative thought to consider today. Take a good look at the architecture of your own community. Is the governance in your region acting as a collection of fragmented competitors, constantly fighting a zero-sum game over the same pieces of the pie? Or is it functioning as a unified operating system, actively cooperating to expand that pie and drive true human prosperity? Thank you for exploring the deep mechanics of governance with me on this explainer. Keep questioning the systems that build our world, and I'll catch you next time.